Welcome back to Gold Derby. I'm Christopher Rosen. I'm so pleased to be joined by Stuart Zicherman, the showrunner of American Sports Story, Aaron Hernandez, the FX limited series about the complicated late NFL player Aaron Hernandez. Stuart, I love this show. I just wanted to start there. Like, why? I assume there's a lot of reasons, but why was telling Aaron Hernandez's story, so compelling to you, and like, kind of like, how did him as the central figure lead to the show that you wanted to the story you wanted to tell about the NFL and everything around it as well?
Yeah, well, I mean, as a sports fan, I thought I knew the story, coming in, and I always love, taking on projects where the story isn't what you thought. And when the Boston Globe Spotlight team came out with their Gladiator piece, it really kind of rebroke the Aaron Hernandez story for everyone and for me, and it just shed a lot of light on the complexity of the story. I think that in our modern world, we tend to sort of one-dimensionalize things, and Hernandez had been one-dimensionalized. He'd been sort of, made into a monster, a gangbanger, a thug, and it just, no one's born a monster, and I thought it was really interesting, his story and how he became what he became, actually spoke to a lot of really important big ideas and themes that I thought were worthy of a show.
So you mentioned there, like, I guess the thing you didn't like, the one dimensional narrative of Aaron Hernandez, right? Like, and this thing I love about this show, and I felt was like, I honestly couldn't believe you were able to pull it off, is showing all the crimes, and like obviously all the murders, and the real, like, what Aaron Hernandez did, but not demonizing him. And every time I was like, how are they how did you do this, basically? Because I'm like, I just found it, like, as a viewer, you're like really not rooting for him, I guess, but you're not also I don't know. I just found it like really nuanced, and like the way it's handled, I thought was so well. So I guess, like, how did you do that, and how did you kind of keep that nuance around him, where it's like, yeah, no one is born a monster, so you're showing like the full picture of him, but I'm sure it would have been very easy to make him like easily like, oh, this is just like make the audience feel like he sucks, basically, right? And I don't think you walk away with that's not what the show is. And every time I was like, man, this is so really, I felt like so unique, and especially nowadays where everybody loves to like demonize every, like, good and bad. Everything is so binary. You do that with Aaron Hernandez. We can talk about this later too. You do that with the entire show. I think every character, and even the NFL and football in general, is not demonized. But I guess just specifically with Aaron Hernandez, kind of how did you really make it so nuanced with him, and the approach to him?
Well, thank you for saying that. That was like the hardest, that was like the hardest sort of challenge, right? Like when you start out a show like this, I kept thinking about it as we don't want to make him likable, right? Like it's not, but you want to make him watchable. How are we going to make this character watchable for 10 episodes? And to do that, you have to create a certain amount of empathy for him. And if not sympathy, without forgiving him for what he's done, right? So it's like the idea is like, yes, he's done these awful things. He's killed, people and ruined people's lives. But by the same token, there are all these elements in his life that contribute to how he got there. And I think that we could sort of draw, you know, um, sympathy for him from those things. I mean, he was a happy-go-lucky kid. It's an interesting place to start. He lost his father in high school. He had this, sort of torn apart family, and he was born into this body. That he was a hulking child. That could only become one thing. And his father wanted him to be a football player, and just the way that the sort of, what was interesting about the Globe story, and the subsequent podcast that Wondery did was that it really painted a picture of, Hernandez is guilty, but there are other people and institutions in this story that are also guilty,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I thought that if we could sort of, illuminate that, it would sort of give the audience a way into Aaron, and again, for me, I always try and find a way into characters that, like, in a really relatable way. Like, what's something really, really relatable? And for Hernandez, it struck me, the more I got into the research, that he was a person who was always struggling to find his authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's something that we all, at some point of our lives, experience. He was not growing up in a world where he was allowed to be what he might want to be, to explore what he might want to be. And I think that, yeah, it just allowed us, a way into him. And
Right.
then also you have to cast the right actor. This actor is extraordinary.
So that was the next question. Is like I like obviously I'd seen Josh Andres Rivera in West Side Story. That was the first time I saw him as an actor, and I know he was in obviously the Hunger Games as well. It just completely blew me away. I cannot believe what a performance it is. He's so incredible and doing such a difficult task, which is like you're saying, like make him watchable, creating sympathy, but not like letting him off the hook. And like really, this is such a complicated figure. I don't know, like how hard was it to find this and obviously being able to pull off the physicality. I know he's not as big as Aaron Hernandez, but like believably, at least in a lot of these scenes, look like he can play football and like
Yeah.
all of these different aspects of it. I was like, it doesn't seem very easy. Like, how did you like find Josh and like, yeah, like how difficult was that really to cast this part? It just seems like such an incredibly high bar that he hits, but I don't know how you did it.
Well, it's hard. I mean, it's funny when I was writing the pilot, I remember thinking like, oh man, we're never gonna find this guy, you know? And but we did, and what's funny is in the audition process, we saw a lot of people performing the role, they could play the anger and they could play the darkness and they could play like the murderous Aaron. But what we needed was somebody who could play the other side of it too, someone who could play the funny, goofy Aaron and the sensitive Aaron and the aspirational Aaron. And Josh just has this incredibly unique um, part of him that is just like, he's so likable. He's so charming. And I think Hernandez actually had that quality. People really liked him, you know. And I could, what was great is Josh could play the darkness, right? But he could also play like the deeply human moments. And so when you find that actor, it's like then you can start writing toward it, and I can write more stuff that that was complicated,
Mhm.
and nuanced, and because I knew he could do it.
And I think from a viewing standpoint, you're right. Like he is such a like. I think like Josh, it exudes kind of like a likability,
Yeah,
and like kind of like you're really like oh you like are rooting. It's like it's like you're really rooting for him, and it's that what makes the show so heartbreaking because obviously where it's going, but it's just like oh man, like if one or two things maybe were different in Aaron's life, maybe it doesn't turn out this way, right? Or like if just certain choices were made that were not made, and it's like really it's just a heartbreaking story and like I said, I think you do such a great job, like creating that nuance and showing that. I mentioned that before. Like, I also was like, I think you could do a version of Story. It's like, man, the NFL sucks. Like, that's bad. Like, and football in general, let's condemn that. And this show doesn't do that at all either. And you mentioned you're a sports fan. I could tell just by watching. I didn't even realize, like, you know what I mean? Because I was like, oh, you like understand the draw of the NFL. Obviously, it's like the biggest sport in America, certainly, right? It's like I would say it is America's pastime now, beyond baseball. I guess for you, like, yeah, like, can you talk a little about like showing that, like, maybe a 360 picture of the NFL, like the good and the bad, and like not kind of like hammering the league or just like, I don't know. I just found also that all of that like really
yeah.
well done.
Well, I think it's really important. Thank you for saying that. I think it's really important to not, it's okay to indict the league for certain things, but it's also our favorite sport.
Hmm.
It's my favorite sport. I watch it for 10 hours every Sunday. I mean, I can't stop, and and so I thought it was important to, it's a very, very dangerous sport. And even though the league has taken certain measures to combat the CTE and the brain issues, you still have guys, incredibly athletic guys running high speed at each other and colliding. And I think that you know, the CTE is only part of it. I think what we wanted to show is it's not just about the game, it's about the process. It's
Hmm.
about the institution. It's about football in general, right? And how like these kids, like Aaron, he's born into this body like that couldn't be anything else. And it's a way out for kids like that, right? It's a way to money, fame, fortune, like notoriety. And the system kind of eats them up. It's like Aaron Hernandez would have been much better off going to UConn, where his father went, where the coach cared about him, where he really, could have started to deal with like the loss of his father and things like that. He wouldn't have made it to the NFL, you
Hmm.
know. he gets recruited by Florida by Urban Meyer, and again, that's just part of the system that kind of eats up these kids and kind of spits them out. And I think that we were interested in sort of indicting the system even more than just indicting the NFL.
Yeah.
There's a whole system there.
And you kind of see that with Urban Meyer, I think, especially like again, another character, maybe a different show or something. That character is very villainous, and obviously, like maybe not the most, like sympathetic character in the show, but also like I understood where he was coming from, right? Like he's just a cog in this
Yeah,
machine, and like the success has to be there, and he kind of just like same, you just moving through, right? And like hoping against hope that these players can hang on, basically, right? Like that seems like a lot of it is just like
yeah.
blind faith that they're not going to fall through the cracks or something terrible is going to happen. That they'll just hopefully make it through. And it's just a wild, it's
Well,
like a
and
wild thing. Yeah.
a confidence and an arrogance, right? That you can change them or help them, you
Yeah.
know. And I think that like it was really important to us in a story that has been one dimensionalized. We wanted to sort of, we really paid careful attention to not never sort of like one dimensionalize anybody. Urban Meyer may not have done the right thing at every stage of this story, but he set out to do that. I think in his mind, he did believe he could help Aaron.
Hmm.
He did believe he could help those kids, But again, winning is a tremendous amount of pressure that involved in that job, and I think we wanted to show all sides of it.
I really think you do such a great job of it. You have so many, I guess, like we talked about like the football. I found like the football again, like the way you're recreating scenes and also I guess folding in archival footage too. I just that all of that I found was like really well done. And like again, like as a sports fan, I get like I feel like sports fans are gonna watch the show like knowing the story or knowing how football works,
Yeah.
and they're gonna expect something. Because I was watching and it was like, oh, this is great because I've seen sports shows where it just doesn't look right. And I guess like can you talk a little about like making sure all of those scenes kind of felt right and felt authentic to the NFL. Obviously, that I think the show hits that mark. But I guess it seems trickier than maybe than it should be because based on other shows or anything I've seen. So how'd you kind of do that?
Well, I mean, it's a tricky process, right? Like you learn as you go. As a sports fan, I really wanted it to look real. You are very, very constricted by your budget, and what you can really do, and by the actors. But we learned as we went. We have an incredible company called Game Changing Films, that basically they're kind of like the choreographers of all the sports, right? So they come in and they basically like you tell them what you want to accomplish. We want to recreate this play. We want to have a moment where Aaron makes a great catch, or he runs through a bunch of guys and they get hit really hard, and they choreograph it, and then they bring in like these sort of former players and all this, and they kind of and we learned as we went. The Florida stuff, we used a lot more archival footage in the Florida stuff because we could. We had access to that footage. For the NFL stuff, we did not have access to anything, so we had to really recreate it. And we did. We took a stadium, big NFL sized stadium in Orlando, and we brought in, all these players, and we ran the plays, and we brought in NFL film shooters and had cameras, on 700 millimeter lenses, at the top of the stadium, you know,
Yeah.
and yeah, it was cool. It was really fun. I mean, to be on the field with all those guys was a lot of fun for me.
Yeah. It
Yeah.
looks really well. It does. I think it looks really great. So that was another thing I really liked about the show. Obviously it's a serious subject matter. And I did love some levity. I feel like you get out of the Bill Belichick character. I love Norbert Leo Butz. I think that's great casting. He plays Belichick so well. I love I've watched the clip of him like "It's My Life." I think that's maybe his first scene with like the Bon Jovi blasting. It's so great. I guess like casting a guy who again like the other thing that I think is really cool about the show is you're casting people who are still so prominent in the like Bill Belichick I see all the time, right? Even though he's not coaching, I mean he's like on TV every weekend. And I guess like how did you kind of like go about trying to find actors? Yeah, for like specifically, I guess Bill. Like, how did you kind of think about who you would cast for that and how to really nail what I think makes Bill Belichick? I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was a really hard one, right? Like, because again, you come to this and you don't want to just recreate people exactly as they are.
Hmm.
You want to sort of like, I always tell the actors, like, just find the nuance of the character. And that's like, but we have to entertain. And, the Belichick one's challenging because Belichick in real life doesn't give you much. Like, how do when I started looking at it, I was like, how do you write that character? So you have to kind of you have to kind of sort of like just take a flyer. And like, I always thought Belichick, I think he's actually probably more fun to be around than he appears. And I knew that he loved music and I knew he loved Bon Jovi. And I also thought of him like kind of like a mad scientist, like a guy with his abacus,
Mhm.
kind of sitting there in the dark room, figuring things out, puzzles, and so yeah, you're just trying to sort of like, you know, you imagine a version of the character that you think is real, but that you can write. Because I couldn't write him just as some curmudgeon-y grump. It would have been fun.
I guess like what has been the like I guess now that the show is obviously completed and stuff, what kind of feedback have you gotten from like people in the NFL, if any, or like any like former players or anything? Have you heard about people who watch the show and were like, oh, like this is really kind of made me rethink of what I thought of Aaron, or just like in general, like the league and all these different things? I think, like I said, I think the show is so well done. So I was wondering, like, what kind of feedback have you gotten?
I haven't heard that much from players or people in the league. I think the league has kind of like been kind of like,
Okay.
a little, don't they don't want people talking about it that much. But I mean, I've heard from, there are prominent people in the sports world that have seen it that, you know, feel like we really captured the essence of the story and that we were fair to the story, which again, this was a story where people almost believe from all the articles that were written and documentaries and all that, people believe that that was the story. But all those, when you make a documentary, you're not in the room where it happened, you're just speculating.
Mhm.
And, we had to sort of go past speculation. We had to sort of say, like, this is what we thought happened when Odin Lloyd was murdered. This is what we thought happened when Aaron asked Belichick for a trade. Like, we have to go into the room and write those scenes. And that's why you make a show like this. And I think that, um, people have been really kind about like our portrayal of Aaron, that again, we didn't let him off the hook, but that we sort of illuminated elements of his story that people just didn't know.
Yeah, I really love this. I mean, I guess like the other question I was going to ask you is like the American Sports Story is like a franchise. I think this is great. This show really reminded me of like People versus OJ, obviously, or like even like the OJ Made in America doc, right? That Ezra Edelman did. I feel like you're kind of getting a lot of the same like the things in the show that you're doing and the nuanced approach and how this is expanding out beyond just one player. I really love. So I guess what are like what's next? Like what else can you do this with? Or like have you thought about like other like athletes or stories like this that you could really kind of dive into in this format?
Yeah, I mean that's more of a Ryan Murphy, it's his franchise, and that's more up to up to him. But yeah, we've talked a bit about there are lots of great stories in the sports world, and and I think that they've always asked. This originally started as it was going to be an American crime story, um, and whether it's a crime story or a sports story, I think it was really important to the producers and to FX that it's a story that speaks to like larger themes in America, right? And I think there are some great stories, and we've talked about a few, we've pitched a few. They've bought a podcast that is of interest to me that I think could be a good story. So I think there are a lot of great big themes in American sport that speak to all larger themes in America that I think that we can make shows out of.
Yeah, I hope they do. Ryan Murphy, if you were watching, please get Stuart to do more of this show and this franchise. I think it is just fantastic. I really love this show. American Sports Story, Aaron Hernandez. You can watch all the episodes now. It's a fantastic limited series. Stuart, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate talking to you about
Thank
this.
you so much for watching the show. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.